Good morning and welcome to the King Institute for Faith and Culture. We participate this morning in an old tradition at King that goes back all the way back to 1960, a tradition in which faculty every year choose 2 graduating seniors to do a talk for the entire student body. Sometimes these are very highly personal, sometimes they're about research. They have spread across a number of subjects that are always interesting and always a nice window into the exciting and wonderful things that our students do. I'm delighted this morning to welcome Gracie Delaney to this highly prestigious position, and next week we will have our second student lecture by Amanda Meadows, and that'll be our final event for the year, so if you need your CCS credit, don't forget that. So I'm going to ask Dr. Mongold to come and introduce Gracie.
Good morning, everybody. I'm really excited and so proud to be up here to introduce to you one of my favorite students, Gracie. She comes to us here at King from a small town outside of Nashville, Hickman County. She's a criminal justice major, which is maybe the most important thing you need to know about her. But she had an internship at the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation a few years ago, and she turned that into a job, so get your internships. And she's working there now as a victim service in the Victim Services unit as a Victim Services Liaison, and then when she graduates, she's going to continue her career there and move up to the position Victim Services Coordinator. She calls herself a workaholic, and she is, but we're always working on that. She's a treat to have in class, especially when she is hungry or tired, because you get Gracie Unfiltered, and it's amazing. She's firm in her beliefs, and she's still always willing to listen to the other point of view, and King was going to be proud to call her a graduate. So I think we'll all benefit from what she has to say today, and Gracie, you can do it.
You guys don't want to know what's in this cup. No, I'm just kidding. It's definitely just water, I promise. Thank you so much, Dr. Mongold, for that very kind introduction. It's really been an honor to be one of your students. I would also like to thank Dr. Dodderwijk, the King Institute of Faith and Culture, and the faculty that selected me for this opportunity. It is also a very great honor, and I'm very proud to be up here this morning. I would also really like to thank the speaking tutor in the ACE, Ami Green. She helped me so much with this, so thank you so much. We turned an essay into a speech, so thank you, Ami. One more person to thank, I promise. I would also like to thank my family and friends for all of their support throughout my 4 years at King, and especially through this really arduous task that I was selected to be given. So this morning we will be talking about combating human trafficking. I'm literally shaking, guys. It's really scary up here. Thank you. Before I begin, I do want to give out a disclaimer. This presentation will include themes of abuse, child abuse, sexual assault, and trafficking, so please be advised that these topics are difficult for some to hear, but please feel free to leave at this time if you genuinely are unable to listen to these topics. According to Free the Girls, a nonprofit organization, there are 50 million individuals enslaved to human trafficking. To help us visualize this appalling number, you need to add together the populations of New York City, Los Angeles, Chicago, Houston, Phoenix, Philadelphia, still going, San Antonio, San Diego, Dallas, and San Jose. And you are still 25 million human beings short. In order to even reach the number of individuals that are being trafficked right this second, you have to double the populations of the 10 most populated cities in America to even get close to the amount of people who are victims of trafficking. That is insane. Free the Girls even goes as far as to note that human trafficking has occurred in every country on earth at any point throughout history. And yes, that means it is happening in our backyard. And yes, that means my backyard, your backyard, and right here in Bristol, Tennessee. Knowing where to start, Knowing where to start to and how to combat human trafficking is very overwhelming, but that does not mean it is not impossible. It is possible, and simply educating people and bringing awareness to this topic can and will save lives. So, before we get into the disgusting details of human trafficking, let's define some of the terms that you will be hearing often. According to the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime, human trafficking is the recruitment, transportation, transfer, harboring, or receipt of people through force, fraud, or coercion with the aim of exploiting them for profit. Let's define force, fraud, and coercion. Force is when you make someone do something against their will. Fraud is the wrongful or criminal deception intended to result in financial or personal gain. Coercion is the practice of persuading someone to do something by using force or threats. And throughout my research on this complex topic, every expert I spoke to always reiterated the fact that at least one of these three actions must be present for human trafficking to have occurred. With this in mind, I urge you all to identify which of these three acts are present as I discuss these topics and relate them to real human trafficking cases. Let's move on to the misinformation of human trafficking. When we hear human trafficking, we usually just think of sex trafficking. We imagine girls and young women being snatched off the street and thrown into a van, never to be seen again, as she is to spend the rest of her life being sold in the sex trade industry. But human trafficking is far more complicated than this scenario. Traffickers are smart. Traffickers begin with love. Traffickers groom their victims with romantic, platonic, or familial relationships and exploit their victims' needs and wants. Because nearly everyone has this misconception that trafficking starts with a snatch and grab, it makes it that much harder to combat trafficking, and it makes it that much easier for traffickers to traffic their victims because civilians are scared of and worried about the wrong things. Proving the myths of trafficking as false information is vital because if people have a false idea of what trafficking looks like, they're going to miss the actual vulnerabilities and oppressive situations that are in their own community. In other words, it is extremely difficult to help any victim in a trafficking situation due to looking for the wrong signs or ignoring red flags. Educating oneself on what trafficking actually looks like, knowing that it is substantially more complicated and personal than someone grabbing your little sister or brother off the side of the road, this is a step in the right direction. So this begs the question, how are we supposed to combat trafficking when we are only scared of the man in the white van? Here are some very common misconceptions of human trafficking. Trafficking victims are only women and girls. It's always or usually a violent crime. All human trafficking involves commercial sex. Only undocumented foreign nationals get trafficked within the United States. Human trafficking only happens in illegal or underground industries. If the victim consented to be in their initial situation, then it cannot be human trafficking or be against their will because they knew better. Traffickers target victims they don't know. These common beliefs are some of many factors that contribute to the difficulty of detecting and ending human trafficking. To help combat this false information, we will be discussing 4 types of trafficking: labor, sex, familial, and intimate partner. First, let's define and discuss labor trafficking. Labor trafficking occurs when force, fraud, or coercion is used to make an individual work or provide services. The State Department found that the vast majority of trafficking in the world is labor trafficking. Oftentimes, research shows that sex trafficking is more prevalent than labor trafficking, but this is simply because labor trafficking is less frequently detected and reported. You might be wondering where labor trafficking occurs. The answer is pretty much everywhere and in every industry. This includes agriculture, carnivals, construction work, catering, domestic work, fishing, hospitality, massage parlors, and landscaping, which is the industry with the highest reports of labor trafficking. Here are some indicators of labor trafficking. If someone is unpaid or paid little, if they are recruited through false promises, if they do not have control over their own documents, if they owe large debt and can't pay it off, if they endure workplace abuse and restrictions, or if they are running a business for someone in exchange for basic needs. With all of this in mind, let's move on to sex trafficking. Sex trafficking is a form of modern-day slavery in which individuals perform commercial sex through the use of force, fraud, or coercion. Here are some sex trafficking indicators for children and adults. If someone has a history of leaving home without permission, if they're supporting themselves while on the run, which likely means they're selling drugs, if they have tattoos associated with living the life, for instance, crowns with the words "my king" or "my queen," or gang-affiliated tattoos. If they're showing up to school wearing high-expense clothing, having multiple cell phones, or now own things that you know they could not have afforded themselves. If they're fearful of law enforcement in the Department of Child Services. If they're unable to identify their number of sexual partners. If they have a history of experienced homelessness. If they have no ID, a false ID, or they're lying about their age, if they have multiple STDs or STIs, if they have a history of prolonged drug use and don't have a job to support it, if they are not enrolled in school and they should be, or if they're in a relationship with a much older individual, regardless of gender and age. Now moving on to familial and intimate partner trafficking. The Department of State defines familial trafficking as when a family member or guardian is the victim's trafficker or the one who sells the child to a third-party trafficker. And intimate partner trafficking occurs when one spouse or partner is the victim's trafficker. According to the Polaris Project, in 2020, 42% of trafficking victims were brought into trafficking by members of their own families, and 39% were recruited via an intimate partner or a marriage proposition. The selling of children by family members is the most common form of trafficking within the Tri-Cities area. This is happening in our backyard. And overall, children are more likely to be human trafficked by a loved one versus someone kidnapping them from the sidewalk. But there are some cases where family members had intentions of giving the child a better life, but accidentally gave their child away to their trafficker through a job or educational opportunity abroad. Experts say that familial trafficking is the hardest form of trafficking to detect because people think that trafficking victims would have an ugly relationship with their trafficker, not a seemingly loving one. People believe the trafficker would appear to be disturbed, when really they are the average white picket fence family man or woman. Here's a case of familial trafficking that occurred right here in the Tri-Cities area, right here in your backyard. There were two sisters, the youngest 9 and the eldest 12. They both lived with their mom and dad and had several family members always moving in and out of their home. The parents of the children, as well as the family members, were all addicted to meth. The oldest sister was attending school dirty and obviously neglected, so a teacher called in a welfare check. Officers completed the welfare check and found the girls' house disgusting with used needles everywhere. 6 months later, the girls were placed into a foster home. After being in the foster home for a period of time, the foster parents noticed many red flags that indicated the girls had endured severe sexual trauma. The young sisters refused to sleep in a bed, sleeping in a pile on the floor. The 9-year-old could tell you how to use sex toys, and the girls started talking about how their family members, including their parents, took them to truck stops to see their boyfriends. After this information was reported to law enforcement and there was a further investigation, law enforcement discovered that the mom was the trafficker and those family members that were in and out of the home raped the girls too. But the girls are now safe, adopted by their foster family, and undergoing counseling. This case brings up many questions, but the most important one is, who are traffickers? Traffickers are smart. They do what costs the least amount of money. Does it make more sense to have someone locked away in a silent-proof room in your basement, or having someone being able to walk into the mall or grocery store with you? Traffickers and their trafficking patterns are so ingenious that traffickers have said before it's as easy to buy a child as it is to buy a pizza. Snatch and grabs are actually incredibly rare. The truth is, traffickers are just too smart to do something that would cause that level of national attention. The media tends to over-exaggerate how prevalent these are because, after all, they are searching for a big headline. If it bleeds, it leads, right? So what is scarier, being snatched off the street in broad daylight, or being groomed for several months by your trafficker, falling in love with them, and then being asked to run one errand, because it won't be a big deal, leading to your partner now being the one who owned your body? Which situation appears you had more of a choice? Traffickers are so smart that they even use social psychology to traffic their victims. In 2012, R.J. Martin Jr. published an article that taught pimps how to be good at their jobs. He wrote, "To be a good pimp, you have to understand Maslow's hierarchy of human needs." In his writing, he explains the pyramid and notes that every human has these basic needs. He goes on to say how he uses this pyramid to assess his prostitutes and find out how to meet their needs. He expresses how you need to combine needs from more than one level of the pyramid in order to earn their trust and loyalty. He even writes that if you can find a way to fall in love with your slaves, then they will work harder for you and you will make more money. To support this, the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime found in 2020 that 51% of traffickers focused on economic needs when exploiting their victims. They know what they're doing, and they do it very well. So now we know what a trafficker looks like, let's discuss their recruiting tactics. Victims, especially children, are recruited through the desire for love, affection, money, safety, and family. These tactics can be used in various different ways. They range from social media and the internet at large to interpersonal relationships. Grooming is one of the most common tactics. The Polaris Project writes that sex traffickers carefully and methodically work to gain their victims' trust, create a degree of dependence, and subtly promote the idea that selling services is normal, acceptable, and necessary. Ultimately, successful grooming results in vulnerable people cooperating in their own exploitation and abuse and believing they have made the choice to do so independently. Another tactic is the investment of time, gifts, building of trust, and sense of belonging. This can also be seen through increased isolation, control, breaking down, and rebuilding identity. Grooming is also done through overstepping sexual boundaries for an extended period of time. Now that we've laid the foundation of what human trafficking is, who it affects, and who traffickers are, how do we combat this seemingly overwhelming issue? The simplest way is educating yourself. The more that you know about it, the more you know what you should really be looking for, such as the indicators of various forms of trafficking, as well as knowing how powerful your money is. The latest report from the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime for 2022 reported that 41% of trafficking victims are detected by initial action by the victim themselves, 28% from law enforcement, such as police, border patrol, the FBI, etc., 11% from the community or a stranger, 10% from the victim's family, 9% by advocacy groups or institutions, and 1% from others. This is very fascinating. This means that the vast majority of victims take the first step in reaching out. It's not the rescue scenario from either bus or even from nonprofits helping identify and removing victims. Without a stable job to support themselves, and usually returning to the environment that created their vulnerabilities, 80% of women who have been trafficked will be trafficked again. I couldn't find one for men, I'm sorry. Organizations like Rethreaded help combat this phenomenon by hiring human trafficking survivors so they can find more opportunities to succeed, and oftentimes help them become advocates to prevent human trafficking. Rethreaded employees hand-make unique products, and the organization helps sell their products, giving these survivors a stable job. This means we need to pay attention to where our products are coming from. The International Labor Organization reports that 86% of labor trafficking is done in the private sector, which is the part of the national economy that is not controlled by the government. So, what you buy does matter. Good On You is an app that lists thousands of clothing, footwear, and accessory brands, showing you how each brand rates for their impact on labor, the environment, and animals. Good On You reports that brands like Nike, H&M, American Eagle, Levi's, Under Armour, Vans, and so many other brands that we wear and buy every single day are rated significantly low when it comes to labor and how they treat the employees who make their products. This means that some of the company's supply chain is not certified by labor standards, which ensures worker health and safety, living wages, or other labor rights. In my research, I found that Shein, Fashion Nova, Old Navy, Forever 21, Zara, and many other brands were some of the worst scoring in labor, meaning absolutely none of their supply chain is certified by labor standards, and there is no evidence it ensures payment in its supply chain. I understand that we are all college kids or parents with families and children. I know that money is tight for a lot of us, but spending more money on apparel products can save millions of lives from being trafficked. The Sweat and Toil app is another great educational tool that allows you to search what countries use child labor, forced child labor, and/or live labor to produce their goods. So next time you go shopping and you decide to try a new exotic coffee from the Dominican Republic, use the Sweat and Toil app to discover if that coffee was made from the mom and pop farm on the label or from children who have been sold into slavery. Again, I know that money is tight for a lot of us, but paying attention to where your goods come from and potentially having to spend a little extra does make a difference. Your money has power, and we have power. Please take out your phones now and scan this QR code. This will take you to a link tree of resources where you can report trafficking and child abuse. You can have a human trafficking training, also links to the Good On You app and Sweat and Toil apps, as well as survivor stories. Just bookmark this, keep it in your Safari. I see some of you not taking your phones out. Please take your phones out. This is serious, guys. This is so serious. Take your phones out and scan this and keep this. It is so important. It's not happening to you, but it could be, and it could happen to your child. It could happen to your grandparent. It could happen to your parents, your cousins. It could happen to any of you. This is serious, guys, and it's happening here in Bristol. It really is. Thank you for coming out this morning, and I hope that you learned something, and please take care of yourself because I know this is a heavy topic, so thank you.
Gracie, on behalf of King University, we've got a plaque for you. You did a wonderful job. And we thank you for helping us all to be more thoughtful, resourceful, and responsible citizens through your knowledge and information. Thank you so much. There you go. Thank you so much. You're dismissed.